I thought it would be nice to talk a bit about Bardo, which is a teaching in the Vajrayana tradition, actually. Bardo, most people have heard something of Bardo and know of it in the context of the teachings in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Bardo Tocho, which is the liberation through hearing in the Bardo. And most people understand that it has something to do with death and the experience after dying. But the teachings on Bardo also have to do with our experience of transitions of any kind in our lifetime. There are actually 6 Bardos, but I won't go into that kind of technicality. So Bardo teachings are related to most simply to impermanence, which, as you know, is a pretty basic Buddhist teaching, common, I think, to all traditions. And so Bardo has to do with big transitions like birth to death, birth itself, aging, and so on, accidents, being sick, getting well. But it also medium-sized things and very tiny things as well. So the Bardo also refers to the transition of this moment to this moment. So now, 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 now. All of the times between the words are Bardo, and the words too are Bardo. Bardo refers most specifically to the in-between time. One thing ending and another beginning. So as you know, I'm sure, the teachings on impermanence are very easy to understand, but very hard to live. There's, as you know, I'm sure, they lead into the teachings on the absence of a self, of a fixed, permanent, separate self. Since I'm a psychologist, I don't typically like to use the word ego for this, but it's so much more convenient than every time saying a fixed and permanent separate sense of self. So when I say ego, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the Western sense of the ability to use logic or to have a sense of one's experience or things like that. So they teach that the impermanence teachings point to the fact that our experience is changing all the time, including any sense of who we are. So we know that we change over time, go from baby to child, you know the story. We're always changing. Our bodies are changing, our minds are changing. Our hearts are changing, both during this life and, according to the Tibetans, Tibetan Buddhists, also between death and rebirth. I would like to suggest that you just take a moment now to turn toward your own direct experience in this moment, whatever it is. Just eyes open, eyes closed, doesn't matter. Just notice what you're experiencing in your body, your emotions, and your mind. And notice that there's constant change. So Bardo also often can be translated as gap, as in mind the gap, or probably not so much the store. I don't even know if that still exists, which, if it doesn't, is another example of impermanence, I suppose. Anyway, it's the in-between time we've lost in this culture a great deal of our in-between time. When I was growing up, if you wrote a letter to someone, you knew that you had probably a good week before they would get it. And if they responded very quickly, they would put it in the mail, and it would be, a whole week would have gone by before you got a response. Long distance phone calls, as we called them, were very expensive. So people didn't do a lot of phoning over long distances. We wrote letters and sent postcards. We don't do that anymore. Now, I'll speak for myself, I get impatient if I've sent an email in the morning and I haven't heard anything back in a couple of hours. We've lost a lot of our in-between time, which I think is a big loss, frankly. So the transitions that Bardo can refer to could be something like the ending of a relationship, the experience one has as it's ending and then has ended. There's a lot of emotion that can come up in such a situation, obviously. It could be an ending like retirement or the completion of a project. We just completed a remodel in our bathroom. It could be the loss of an ability, or a reduction in, for example, one's ability to hear or see or sense or smell. Those are all Bardo experiences as we transition from one state to another. There could be an accident, and in that moment before the accident and after the accident, life could have completely changed, right? And that experience is Bardo. The sense of being in between and of not knowing how to go on. It also could be, as I mentioned, just one moment to the next. It could also be gaps that are happy ones, like at least theoretically getting married, having a child, going from being not a parent to being a parent, or the loss of a child. These are all Bardo. And Bardo teachings point to some of the experiences that happen in Bardo. So there's a lot of uncertainty, a sense of not knowing, right? Which, to the extent that you've been practicing meditation in whatever tradition, there's recognizing those moments of simply not knowing. Am I making sense to you? Be helpful to me if you do something so I can tell that I'm connecting with you. So in those gaps, we often feel awkward. It's kind of like, you don't know what to do with your arms, or sit, or say what you should say or not say. As a therapist, I've often talked with clients about the ability to stay present with feeling awkward is extremely liberating. If you can feel awkward, I'm not saying that you like feeling awkward, but if you can just be with it, you can go anywhere, or at least many places that you might otherwise avoid. Most of us have been taught, if you feel awkward, don't go there, right? But if you can feel awkward, you can go all kinds of places. When I went to one of my college reunions, I had been meditating for some years at that point, and I went to a party and stood around feeling awkward. And I know that same situation when I was younger, I would have left. I wouldn't have gone, probably. I would have felt uncomfortable. Awkward is pretty uncomfortable, but that's Bardo. That's the not knowing. Or we could say it's the experience of space. That's another translation of Bardo, experience of space. In the Tibetan tradition, there's two kinds of Bardo. There's ultimate Bardo and relative Bardo. Are you familiar with teachings on absolute and ultimate? No. Okay, so ultimate, some of you are. So ultimate refers to how things are, absolute truth. So in the Tibetan tradition, we would say things are, the nature of mind is an absolute teaching. It doesn't change no matter what you do. Okay, it's not subject to impermanence. The mind is knowing and empty, inseparable luminosity, emptiness. So luminosity doesn't mean bright light. It means the awareness is what it means. And then relative Bardo is our experience in samsara. That kind of Bardo is always a word that's about the confused world we live in and the confused mind we have. So that's samsara. So the teachings on Bardo, I actually find them somewhat fascinating. Our usual experience of life is, we're going along and then something interrupts us, right? Does that sound familiar? Something happens. Right now, my husband and I are in an Airbnb while some work is being done on our house. And it's extremely unsettling because, we don't know how the appliances work in the kitchen. We don't know much, actually. There's a lot of high-tech appliances here and no instructions. And then odd things like there's no place to put your food. The people who live here, I think, have a pantry, but it's locked. So it's like, how do you do that experience? That's Bardo, that not knowing. So we usually think that life is, when you do know what you're doing, things are going along, there's no accident, there's no sudden illness, there's no sudden death of a friend or whatever. But the Bardo teachings say we've got it backwards. What's really going on is all these interruptions. It's in those interruptions that we can experience the nature of reality more easily than we can when things are going along just fine. When things are going along just fine, we can rely on habitual patterns. But when we're in an unknown situation or we don't know how to proceed, or even, it can be good, I said before, that's Bardo. And Bardo is an experience that is closer to how things really are than our habitual patterns are. So one of the things that's often said is that the veil between our understanding of what's happening is thinner in the Bardo. So it's regarded as a very opportune situation because there's more chance that we can see the nature of what's happening in our mind, in the phenomenal world, wherever. That because that veil of confusion is thinner, situations in which we don't know what we're doing, in which we're in the Bardo, are actually more auspicious for waking up. One of the things that, so one question I like to ask people in our remaining 3 minutes here is, think of a transition in your life, and it might be one you're going through now, or it might be one from the past, pleasant or unpleasant, some situation that there was change. It might be, a relationship beginning, a relationship ending. It could be any of the other things I've already mentioned, but just think of those. Think of one. Just some situation, and think of how did you handle it? How did you handle that ending before there was another beginning of something else? If we had more time, I would ask you to share some of them. Because describes some of our usual ways of dealing with those kind of bardos. One of them is what's called a shady bounce. Although these days I think it's called ghosting. Suddenly you leave. You just leave the situation without any warning, right? Or somebody leaves you without any warning. That's one way we deal with change with Bardo. Or we ignore the fact that the situation's ending. We go into denial. Bardo would describe that as, well, if we ignore the ending and just move on, don't relate to the ending, the Bardo would say it's like taking a new birth without even, without any awareness. And the Bardo teachings would suggest that you would then be born as a puppy. That's the example in the teachings. It's basically dissociated. Or you could hang on. You might try hanging on to a situation. I had a client who, for years, tried to hang on to a relationship that had ended. She kept thinking that, you know, she was meant to be with this person, and that person would finally realize it and return to her. And of course, that did not happen. And as she became more able to deal with that and to accept the truth of it, her life shifted for the better. But it could be situations that we hang on to, like keeping a job we hate because we're afraid to make a change, or staying in a bad relationship because we're afraid. Mostly it's about fear, of course. Or we become aggressive. That's another thing we do with not knowing. We become dismissive, or we badmouth the situation we're leaving so that we can leave. I never really liked this anyway. Yeah, it's fine with me that this relationship ends because I never really loved you. That kind of thing. Am I making sense? I'm going pretty fast, I realize. Okay. I've seen my students do all of these as they reach the point of graduation. So what's the alternative? Very simply, the alternative is to stay present with whatever's arising during the transition. And that's when our practice is so important, because that trains us to stay present or be present with whatever comes up.